All right, so welcome everyone to our monthly FFF webinar. Pleased you could join us. I think we have a provocative topic tonight and hope it leads to some spirited discussion. So if we all agree with each other, boy, that might be very boring. So hopefully I'll provoke some controversy. So the modern libertarian case against what I'm going to call so-called intellectual property or IP has been building steadily since the 1980s when I first encountered it. Since that time, an impressive volume of work has been produced from many perspectives: economics, political economy, sociology, moral and political philosophy, history, and no doubt other disciplines. It is indeed a case to be reckoned with, at least in my view. My own contributions on this, which you can find online just by searching these titles, is an article I had in the American Conservative called Patent Nonsense. And then I had two articles at the Fee site back when I was editing the Freeman and doing the TGIF column over there. And those were called Intellectual Property versus Real Property and Slave Labor and Intellectual Property. So that's at fee.org. You can find lots of other libertarian work critiquing the case for intellectual property. Roderick Long has a very good page of links to articles all over the place. And if you look on FFF.org for my recent article the last couple months on intellectual property, I have a link to that if you want to pursue this. Also, I'll just do a plug here on YouTube. You'll find, if you search, you'll find a video of a spontaneous debate that erupted at Fee a couple of summers ago during a summer seminar between me and a few of the faculty. About a 10-minute spontaneous debate that I think was kind of fun and might be entertaining to watch. So before I move on to the main issues I want to discuss tonight, I want to answer a question that will occur to many advocates of liberty who maybe are just coming in contact with the topic for the very first time. So the question is, how can someone who supports property rights in physical objects deny property rights in intellectual products, such as the useful application of scientific principles or patterns of words, musical tones, and colors? As I wrote in that article, Patent Nonsense, there is a distinction between physical objects and ideas that is crucial to the property question, in my view. Two or more people cannot use the same pair of socks at the same time and in the same respect, but they can use the same idea. And I put quotes around this phrase, same idea. If not, because if I don't mean the same idea, if it's not exactly the same idea because it's in two different heads, it is ideas with the same content. That tangible objects are scarce and finite accounts for the emergence of property rights in civilization. Gets back to my point about two people can't use the same pair of socks at the same time in the same respect. Considering the nature of human beings and the physical world they inhabit, if individuals are to flourish in society, they need rules regarding thine and mine. But ideal objects, ideas in other words, are not bound by the same restrictions. Ideas can be multiplied infinitely and almost costlessly, and they can be used non-rivalrously or simultaneously. If I articulate an idea in front of other people, each person now has his own copy, in a sense, up in his head. Yet I retain mine. Right? The fact that they've gained an idea in their heads hasn't subtracted anything from me. However the others may use their copies, it is hard to see how they have committed an injustice against me. Practices respectful of private property and physical objects and land emerged spontaneously over millennia, embedded in customs that serve to avert conflict in order to create space within which social beings, human beings, can flourish. So that's where I think you get the grounding for physical property rights, to avert conflict between people. It may not be the only purpose that property serves or property rights serve, although it seems to me the key one, and other possible purposes, I think my hunch is, proceed from this key purpose, namely averting conflict. In contrast, rights and ideas, patents and copyrights, were government monopoly grants, having nothing in common with the notion of property at the heart of libertarianism. So on the one hand, while property and physical objects emerged it's an emergent institution from the ground up, just through people trading and engaging in exchange and social cooperation. These rules emerged. This is not the case with intellectual property. These were imposed by kings, basically. Indeed, copyrights were first extended to officially approved printers under the Crown's censorship regime. Unlike property rights in physical things, IP created or creates scarcity where none existed before. As Kevin Carson puts it, quote, unlike property and tangible goods and land, the defense of which is a necessary outgrowth of the attempt to maintain possession, enforcement of property rights and ideas requires the invasion of someone else's space. So observe that artificial property rights undermine genuine property by authorizing IP holders to enlist government power to stop other people from using their justly acquired resources and ideas. For example, if Jones, having committed no trespass, observes Smith's invention or artistic creation, Jones could be legally stopped from using his own physical property in conjunction with ideas obtained through that observation. I mean, imagine someone saw a painting that someone else painted, maybe brilliant painting, didn't break into the house to see it, okay, that's why I said no trespass. He does it without violating his rights. He now has a mental image of that painting, and he goes home with his own canvas, with his own paint, with his own brush in his own house, and recreates the painting. I don't see how he's violating anyone's rights, but if he stopped from doing that, it seems to me that's a rights violation. Okay, so it sure looks as if IP bestows on Smith, in my hypothetical here, purported rights over Jones's tangible property and even Jones himself. So under IP, Smith is then authorized to invade Jones's boundary. Jones's boundary, stop him from painting, confiscate the painting, or doing something, prevent him from selling the painting even, and that seems like a violation of Jones's rights. One might ask, isn't the idea Smith's? Isn't the idea of the painting or the book or whatever it may be, isn't it Smith's? Possessive, apostrophe S. But I can't see how an idea in Jones's mind can possibly belong to Smith, even if Smith in some sense had it first, unless Smith owns Jones, an unlibertarian notion indeed. For further details on this, I urge you to peruse this large volume of material I've mentioned. Those articles and books address all the relevant issues, including how IP stifles rather than stimulates innovation, and the deadweight loss of IP legal the IP legal process. I mean, imagine all the people who are involved in litigation and stopping other people from violating IP, who could be perhaps, lawyers and whatnot, could be involved in actually producing consumer goods and other things that benefit us. Also contemplate the number of inventions and works of art that were produced over millennia without patents or copyrights. Some of the greatest stuff in the world had no copyright protection ever. Shakespeare, for example. So tonight I want to call attention to a recent article in opposition to intellectual property for what it says about two aspects of the subject that aren't emphasized nearly enough. I'm referring to Butler Schaefer's A Libertarian Critique of Intellectual Property. It's a Mises Institute booklet. In his essay, Schaefer makes an important point about the dependence of progress on imitation and adaptation. Beginning with a parallel in biology, he writes the following. Creativity, like learning in general, is fostered by cross-fertilization and synthesis. We ought to have learned from fundamental principles of biology that reproduction through single-cell division produces little genetic variation. When the life process developed sexual reproduction, the resulting genetic diversity allowed for the proliferation of numerous species as well as intraspecial traits that enhanced adaptive abilities. But, Schaefer continues, patents and copyrights inhibit the creative process by discouraging the exchange of information relating to a particular line of research or exploration. If one scientist has been issued a patent for his invention of a widget, another scientist would likely be discouraged from continuing his own work on a similar product or from making modifications or variations of the patented item. The interplay in which individual insights and proposals are communicated to one another in a group and then subjected to collaborative processes of brainstorming are far more productive of creative ends than is the work of individuals in isolation. Likewise, the cross-fertilization of ideas, techniques, and other influences among communities and artists and scientists have greatly enhanced the creative process. On the other hand, when driven by the rewards of patents, scientists and inventors are known to maintain secrecy in their laboratories and research, lest a competitor gain insights that might advance their own work. The proposition that knowledge and ideas can be made the exclusive property of one who discovers or expresses what was previously unknown is contrary to the nature of the intelligent mind, whose content is assembled from a mixture of experiences of others and oneself. Even the language with which one formulates and communicates his or her understanding to others has been provided by predecessors. That's Butler. That's Butler Schaefer. So as one can see, IP appears to me, strikes at the very heart of the social intellectual process that makes all aspects of progress possible. Government impediments to the free flow of information undermine the very dynamic of an advancing civilization. The other notable point in Schaefer's essay concerns how IP tends to concentrate wealth in large business firms. Now, this should be of concern to libertarians. As you know, the free market has a bad rap. It's charged with fostering monopoly, oligopoly, and plutocracy. We libertarians understand that these tendencies are created and fostered by government power. IP is one of the ways that this occurs. So here's what Schaefer says about this point. There are many other costs associated with IP that rarely get attention in cost-benefit analyses of the topic. One has to do with the fact that the patenting process, as with government regulation generally, is an expensive and time-consuming undertaking that tends to increase industrial concentration. Large firms can more readily incur the cost of both acquiring and defending a patent than can an individual or a small firm, nor is there any assurance that once either course of action is undertaken, a successful outcome will be assured. Thus, individuals with inventive products may be more inclined to sell their creations to larger firms. With regard to many potential products, various government agencies like the EPA, FDA, OSHA, may have their own expensive testing and approval requirements before new products can be marketed, a practice that once again favors the larger and more established firm. Increased concentration also contributes to the debilitating and destructive influences associated with organizational size. In addressing what he calls the size theory of social misery, Leopold Kohr observes that whenever something is wrong, something is too big, close quote. A dynamic applicable to social systems as in the rest of nature. The transformation of individuals into over-concentrated social units contributes to the problems associated with mass size. One sees this tendency within business organizations with increased bureaucratization, ossification, and reduced resiliency to competition, often accompanying increased size. Nor do the expected benefits of economies of scale for larger firms overcome the tendencies for the decline of earnings and rates of return on investments, as well as the maintenance of market shares following mergers. The current political mantra, too big to fail, is a product of the dysfunctional nature of size when an organization faces energized competition to which it must adapt if it is to survive. So in other words, artificially large organizations will be bad things. They'll be inefficient. You'll get distortions of various kinds. And the market has a way, if the government's not involved, of limiting the growth of companies. There are economies of scale to a point, but then diseconomies of scale set in. What government intervention does, IP being an example, is to push back the diseconomies of scale or socialize the diseconomies of scale so that the costs fall on society generally, not the organization. So they survive where they wouldn't survive in the market. As Kevin Carson documents in his book, Organization Theory, A Libertarian Perspective, a text which you can find online, by the way, patents were one of the critical elements permitting the unnatural growth of key firms and the concentration of political economic power during the second half of the 19th century. Carson writes, without the combined influence of tariffs, patents, and railroad subsidies in creating the centralized corporate economy, there would not have been any large corporations even to attempt trusts in the first place. The corporate transformation of the economy in the late 19th century made possible the government's role in railroad subsidies, protectionism, and patents was a necessary precondition for the full-blown state capitalism of the 20th century. For further details, let me recommend a book to you. I'll put the cover up there. Hang on a second. Let's see. There. This, by the way, I'm hoping you can see that. That is Butler Schaefer, the cover of Butler Schaefer's book. And then this is the book I'm going to now mention. It's Against Intellectual Monopoly, and I'm especially going to refer to Chapter 4, published by Cambridge, but again, available free online, and its authors are two very good free market economists, David K. Levine and Michele Boldrin. Okay, so it might be thought that, contrary to what Schaefer says, IP really protects the small firm or independent entrepreneur. After all, if an inventor unveils an innovative product in the marketplace, what would stop a big firm from immediately bringing out competitive products based on the inventor's idea? Wouldn't the firm's superior marketing prowess and pre-existing channels of distribution enable it to drive the inventor from the market? You might think so, but historically this has not been the main effect of IP. In fact, with IP, big corporations are able to buy up and pool patents with other large firms in order to build what amounts to a legal force field around its operations. An independent inventor who gets anywhere near that force field risks having costly IP suits filed against them. This has to have a chilling effect on innovation. As Levine and Boldrin write, patents are just a trading tool among big players. Instead of a competitive market for innovations, we have an oligopolistic market for patents structured around the patent pool mechanism. This use of cross-licensing of patents is not merely the innocuous sharing among existing firms in the industry, nor are patent pools merely a good tool for navigating the patent thicket. They are also a wonderful instrument for preventing new firms from entering the industry. New firms not having a portfolio of defensive patents and not participating in the patent pool find they cannot legally compete with the existing oligopoly. A few pages earlier in the book, Boldrin and Levine write this: without patents, it is argued small firms would lack any bargaining power and could not even try to challenge the larger incumbents. This argument is fallacious for at least two reasons. First, it does not even consider the most obvious counterfact. How many new firms would enter and innovative patents were not around? That is, if the dominant firms did not prevent entry by holding patents on pretty much everything that is reasonably doable. For one small firm, finding an empty niche in the patent forest, how many have been kept out by the fact that everything they wanted to use or produce was already patented but not licensed? Second, people who argue that patents are good for small firms do not realize that because of the patent system, most small firms in these sectors are forced to set themselves up as one-idea companies, aiming only at being purchased by the big incumbent. In other words, the presence of a patent thicket creates an incentive not to compete with the monopolist, but to simply find something valuable to feed it via a new patent at the highest possible price and then get out of the way. As for attempting to make a killing by copying other people's successful ideas, Boldrin and Levine say this is far easier said than done. Quote, picking only winners means waiting until it is clear who is a winner. Well, try it. Try getting somewhere by imitating the leaders only after you are certain that they are the leaders. After all, when a new product comes out, do you really know it's going to be a hit? So if you're planning to copy it and then not have to do any of the R&D and just sell it later, you have to hold back to wait to see how consumers respond to it. You can't be certain. So you're taking a chance if you just go ahead and start marketing it before it shows that it has promise. On the other hand, if you wait, then it's obvious the innovator is able to benefit by that. So while you're waiting, the leaders are earning profits and reputations as pioneering innovators. There's an immense advantage to being the first to market with a new product, even without IP protection. Boldrin and Levine tell the story of Travel Pro, a company that makes suitcases. It was the first company to think to put wheels on suitcases. Now, why it took humankind so long to think of that, I don't know. We had wheel over here and suitcase over here, and yet how many decades did it take to put the two together? Anyway, Travel Pro did that and did not patent it, and it's still in business. Other companies immediately added wheels. Maybe they wouldn't even been able to get a patent for that because the wheel is already well known, the suitcase is already well known. It's getting easier to get patents for all kinds of things, so it's easier than it used to be. But maybe in the days when Travel Pro was first unveiling its wheeled suitcase, they were turned down. Maybe they tried and were turned down on the grounds that that's not patentable. Those two things are too commonplace. Anyway, note also that cheap and easy imitation implies simplicity and therefore a low R&D commitment by the leader. So in other words, if a product is really easy to reverse engineer, and presumably the copier is going to want something that doesn't take a lot of expense to copy, that means it probably didn't take a huge investment in R&D in the first place, because it sounds like it must be a relatively simple product. On the other hand, a product requiring a large R&D commitment suggests a complexity that makes cheap and easy imitation far less likely. Reverse engineering something that's complicated is, again, much easier said than done. The technological revolution, IP is very important. This is not just an academic topic or a philosophical topic for libertarians. It actually has a lot of practical significance. The technological revolution that's going on these days has been dramatically lowering the price of capital goods, making competitive small-scale, non-hierarchical enterprises by independent producers and groups more feasible than ever. I mean, think of how the price of computing power has come down. The price of, say, devices and software for editing video or for producing music, the price has fallen, right? In the old days, you need a studio that cost tens of thousands of dollars. Now, for a couple $1,000s, you can have professional-grade production equipment for music, video, things of that nature. And then that sort of thing's happening in other ways. Machine tools that are produced by computer software, that the price of which is coming down. All the free software, sophisticated software that's available through the open source movement. You can get into business much cheaper today than you ever could. So this is truly a new industrial revolution. Yet we know, and it's a threat to entrenched businesses. They fear loss of market share and profits, and they will use the state through IP to crush this potential for widespread economic secession from the corporate states. In other words, they could try to stop this movement that's already going on by asserting various patent rights and stopping enterprises from going ahead and doing certain things. It's certainly it's certainly a means that can be counted on to exploit. So I think libertarians have a stake in attacking intellectual property. I think it's really the key to freedom and independent enterprise these days. The last thing I'll say is when I published an article along these lines, I immediately got an email from someone who said, well, in that case, Richmond won't care if someone plagiarizes his writing or even adulterates it. In other words, take something I've written and change the words and then publish it. And I wrote a follow-up article arguing that the fact that I don't think IP is legitimate doesn't stop me in any reasonable way from being offended if someone plagiarizes something I've written or adulterates it, actually changes it, for a couple reasons. First of all, there are ways to offend a person that doesn't involve rights violations. I think libertarians are sometimes too narrow and think only rights violations that involve force and fraud are things we can never talk about. But that's not true. It seems to me if you abuse someone in a non-violent way, this is still something libertarians can talk about. So if someone were to take an article of mine and change the wording around and then put it out as if it were mine, for one thing, they're committing fraud against their buyers, if there are buyers. let's say they're not selling it, maybe they're just giving it away. That's still an offense against me. It doesn't mean I can use force or invoke the state, but I can certainly expose that person as a fraud, as a fake, or as someone who's been abusive. The other thing is plagiarism too easily gets mixed up in the IP issue. People immediately think of plagiarism, but the thing that keeps publishers awake, the people that want IP, is not that I'm going to take Atlas Shrugged and put my name on it and publish it. The thing that keeps them awake is I'm going to take Atlas Shrugged, keep Ayn Rand's name on it, and publish it. In other words, plagiarism is a really totally different thing. I don't think it's actionable in the sense of you can get the state to go after a plagiarist. I think it's better to expose the plagiarist as a plagiarist, as representing other people's work as his own. That seems to be a negative thing to say about someone, and it's good to spread the word, and the internet makes that easy. But plagiarism is not the issue. The issue is, can you take a book that someone else has published and not take the author's name on it, leave the author's name on it, and go ahead and publish it. Or also, why should this be against the law? I publish Atlas Shrugged, but I write a new ending to it. Let's say I don't like the way it ends. I put a new ending on it, but I put on the cover, Atlas Shrugged by Ayn Rand with a new ending by Sheldon Richman. I'm not committing any fraud. I'm laying it out there. Maybe there's a market for that. I don't see why I can't sell that. Anyway, I think I'll stop there. Let me unmute. Everybody's now unmuted. Let's see how many people we have today. Okay, we got, 8. I guess that counts me. So we got 7 plus me. And let the discussion begin. Who wants to go first?
You seem to have described the literary equivalent of sampling in music and doing a cover of a song in music, where they'll take a song and then they'll alter it to suit their taste, and it's a cover.
Yeah, I guess. Although these days, I guess if you're going to release a cover, you go through ASCAP, right? You pay
Probably,
something, or else you'll get.
Yeah, I don't know what the law has done to screw that around.
Yeah, so that's all. I'm sure that's all being done.
The government, by the way, is already abusing IP law in several areas. They're doing things like trademarking their logos and things like that, so that if a dissident puts up an image that uses their image, then they'll actually sue them in court for using the image. The copyright laws, I found out, so that you actually can't quote the law.
I heard that you could. That the one law firm that had written like a cease and desist letter to someone was then suing someone for using the cease and desist letter.
Yeah. And they patented pot, which blows your mind because it shouldn't have been patentable anyway.
Yeah, but I wasn't aware that you. I find it hard to believe that it's quoting the law is an IP violation. I don't see how the government doesn't assert IP over the text of the laws.
Yeah, that's the way I'd heard it put. But they've also patented pot, I was going to say. And actually, on one side, it's not good medicine, and they've patented pot as medicine. It's an example of how they've tremendously abused that.
If you look in the Fee archives and search on David Levine's name, I published a lot of stuff by him when I was editing the Freeman. He did an article for me on really weird patent and copyright cases. In fact, he may be the one who tells the story about the lawyer getting mad that someone was using his text in a decent, his cease and desist text. So you might want to look that up. There's some funny stuff, but it's not just funny because it stops people from doing things.
Right. But you can actually see how it's consistent with the idea of copyright. It actually is consistent. Yeah. He viewed what his work product as something protected. Right.
Right, and see, this is where it gets weird because you hear objectivists defend copyright law, but they agree that it should be limited, right? It's not like a property right in perpetuity. It's the life plus, what is it these days? Is 70 years? Life of the author plus 70 years, something like that, and that's extended. They agree there should be a time limit, which is really weird. Why would there be a time limit? There's no time limit on the chair I'm sitting on, right? I can bequeath it to my kids, and they can bequeath it to their kids forever until it disintegrates. It doesn't end in 70 years after my demise. And also, what about the subject of fair use? Fair use means you can quote some quantity of somebody's words, right? Somebody's written work. How much is not really clear, is it? If I can't quote a whole book and say, well, as John Jones said, and then quote the book, that's not going to be regarded as fair use. That's going to be a copyright violation. So, what counts? Anyway, let other people jump in, please. Go ahead.
Yeah. I just wanted to say that, yeah, there's obviously always going to be debate about where do you draw the line, and it's going to have to be judgment calls. And some of them, like you were talking about with the quoting for fair use, a lot of schools and universities and even professor by professor make their own reasonable standards. But I was actually going to get back to the point that you addressed right before that, which was what is the point of having a time limit on the intellectual property laws? And my understanding, which makes sense to me, and I come from a libertarian economic standpoint where just looking at it as pure economics, incentivizing people is extremely important. And I think that's the point of the time limits, because it balances both the need for people to have an incentive to be able to make a profit, and then it also balances that out because it does expire. It has a, for public use reasons, it can benefit, the public even more. So I kind of actually like that setup, because for the economic side of me says, absolutely, you have to incentivize people. You have to let them make money on their creation. Otherwise, you just drop off as far as, for example, my husband works at a company in Silicon Valley, writes codes and applications all the time. Their company, the company he works for, strongly promotes the use of the open source, wants as many of its employees as possible to put their original ideas that they have come up with in response to problems at work on open source. But at the same time, if my husband took those original ideas, he could make a lot of money off of those. And these are things that he's come up with outside of work as he's thinking, and he saw an application at work, and then he thought, oh my gosh, I can see how this would apply in other things. He could make a lot of money off of that. But, so what's the incentive for him to just give it away for free? But maybe for a time, make a profit, and then open up the source. I kind of like that balance. And then on the other hand, my sister and her husband have a band. That's one of the biggest controversies in the music industry right now with intellectual property. It's just so difficult to make money off of it. And so there's so many artists that just don't even try anymore. They've just, the arts are kind of either polarizing, either just a hobby, or if you have to have this mega corporate backing to make any money off of it. So that's where I think the balance for the intellectual property is actually kind of valuable.
Well, a quick response to that. First of all, like I said, through the millennia, there have been many works of art and inventions that were presented to the public in the absence of IP. It just didn't exist. Shakespeare, lots of other examples. So people create for the love of creating, and they also find ways to make some money at it. Your system sounds too much like social engineering, too narrowly consequentialist. I mean, you want to balance, but it seems to me in looking at the balance, you're not taking into account how you will be discouraging innovation. You're only looking at the plus side from your point of view, but not the minus. So you end up getting a net benefit, but that's because you haven't counted the costs. There are people who are discouraged. I mean, I went through some of the argument. Bolger and Levine are economists. They're not Austrians. They're just very good free market neoclassical economists. So theirs is not a moral argument. You won't find a moral argument in their book against intellectual property, intellectual monopoly. It's purely an economic argument. And they talk about all the loss from IP, the loss of innovation. For example, they give the example of James Watt's patents on the steam engine at the end of the 18th century, and they show that while the patents were in effect, there was zero improvement, virtually no improvement in the steam engine. Why? Because Watt and his business partner were too busy suing anybody they could who were trying to make a better steam engine. In 1800, the patents expired, and change and efficiency in the steam engine skyrocketed at that point. It's a graph that sort of goes like flat and then up the moment the patents expire, and people now are free of the threat of litigation. So, you know, I don't see how you can net that out and say, I know that the benefits will outweigh the costs in this balancing act. It seems to me, I don't think you can know that. And plus, I think you're violating other people's rights because you have to cross their boundaries in order to stop them from doing things they would otherwise do.
I have a comment. And I don't have a solution to all this, obviously, but the company that I'm associated with has built up over the years, over 40 years, a very strong, at least on paper, a very strong copyright position for its programs. But when it comes to enforcing it, actually, it becomes an expense. It becomes very difficult to enforce because people change part of the story, or they take a concept, give it another name. So to me, looking at it from that point of view, I don't think it's particularly effective, and it costs money. Now maybe there's a modest deterrent effect, but I don't think it's very effective in terms of actually stopping people. That's one thing. The second thing is I've observed is that because of the copyright position, I think there's much less innovation in the company itself. They tend to think, oh, gee, I can rely on my copyrights, I can rely on my position. And so in the process, I think other people get ahead of them. And so I think there are negatives even to the company that has the copyright or patent position. A company like Apple is spending huge amounts of money. I don't know whether it's cost effective. All these suits with Samsung and so forth, it's a big slugfest. But I can observe on a smaller scale, I really think our company would have been far more innovative over the years if they would have marketed differently. They would have said, okay, fine, I can't rely on copyrights. I got to get out there. I got to get it to as many people as possible before somebody copies me. That means I have to do this differently. And that thinking isn't there.
No, I think those are good points. I'm reminded of a quote from Bill Gates. He said that if at the beginning of the dawn of the personal computer age, the copyright rules that we have today were in effect, there'd be no software industry today. That's a quote, close to a verbatim quote from Gates. If you think about what went on in those early days, if you know the early history of the PC, it was a very communal sort of culture. Everything was shared. It was expected to be shared. And Gates's point is that that's what gave a huge boost to the industry. It's only later that people then think to protect themselves. And in fact, Baldwin and Levine argue in the book that typically, this isn't true in every case, but that there's not IP at the beginning of an innovative process. That's a freewheeling thing where there's no protection. It's only later when in the mature industry that the big players then say, hey, we better protect ourselves from upstarts and challengers, and then they seek protection. Anyway, someone else should be speaking.
This is Gus Calabrese speaking.
Hi, Gus.
Hi. Everyone who's a consequentialist, raise your hand. Nobody's raising their hand. Well, I'm not raising mine either. Most of this argument has been about that, yeah. And I tend to be more of an idealist. I think the individual is so important, their self-actualization, that I don't care really, even if it can be proven that a particular policy for society in general is bad, if it allows individuals to exercise their imagination and their own personal creativity. So I just wanted to interject that. But
I don't think we want to take the position Well, I did a webinar on this very issue. I don't know if you were here, but maybe it was two months ago. But where I pointed out that it's not irrelevant. I don't think it's a coincidence that justice has good consequences. And if you haven't done this before, Google an article by a paper by Roderick Long called "Why Does Justice Have Good Consequences?" I highly recommend it. So I don't think there's a conflict. I don't think the heavens will fall if we do justice. There's that old saying, let justice be done though the heavens fall. I don't think that's the cost of justice. I think justice does have good consequences. I don't think we want to act as if consequences are irrelevant, because we all treasure our books on economics, Human Action, Man, Economy, State, other books. We treasure those books, and those are books about the good consequences of freedom. So we do care about consequences, even if we're not consequentialists. So anyway, that's a whole other topic, and like I said, I did a webinar on that. So let's let someone else speak up.
Hello?
Yes, go ahead. Travis?
Okay. Yes, awesome. Thank you so much.
Hi.
Hi, Sean. Yes, I come from Hollywood, show business, and so yes, this is a huge thing for me. I used to be for intellectual property, but then after reading Stephen Kinslow's book against intellectual property, then I turned to stuff. But I used to be so pro intellectual property, thinking it was protecting us. And in particular, I was taught at Sony Pictures by the vice president of Sony, and he talked about this in depth and how these crazy anarchists and libertarians are against intellectual property, and how he was explaining the concept of, look, if I have a car, and if someone broke into my car and stole it, that's theft. He says it's no different if I make a movie and someone tries to break it and then tries to steal it versus online. And so that was his argument. Theft is theft. Once I've made something, it doesn't matter if I go online or whatnot. And then I listened to another studio head saying that, well, pretty much just what the libertarians are saying is that anything that goes online, it's out there, it's endlessly duplicated, so therefore it's not scarce, therefore it's not real physical property. So my question was, if a Hollywood studio produces a film, and since that film is mere content that can be duplicated endlessly, should patrons have to pay for it in the first place? If not, then how would a Hollywood or film companies make money if the requirements for something to be authentic property has to be a scarce resource? How would media artists earn a living if all their content was, quote-unquote, free for everyone to take without paying the media artists who created it in the first place? And going back to this deals with online, because as soon as something goes online, someone can easily hack into it. So that's my question.
Well, I think you could.
I have an idea on that.
Go ahead.
There's a difference between Sheldon, you talk about putting an idea out there. So if somebody makes a movie or writes a song, is it different whether I listen to the song, learn the song, and perform the song, or simply record your performance and sell that? I mean, it seems to me maybe there's a difference there just in the idea of actual property, where I agree with you that the word property doesn't really apply to an idea. It's not something of which someone can take possession to the exclusion of other people. But maybe that doesn't apply to an actual sound recording or a movie recording.
Well, I'm just wondering with movies in particular, because as soon as something goes online, people can hack it, and it's like that. I mean, the studio gets losses through that. And so I'm just wondering, I'm against intellectual property.
Okay.
With movies, there's already a few things I think they're doing, and that is, at the corporate level, more contracts. They're saying, well, you have to protect this film you're putting on your screen, and if you don't, we can come back at you for not protecting it. And so typically what's going to come out of the piracy process, if you will, I don't like the term, but it's easy to use, what's coming out of that is at least before the DVD comes out, all you see is really cruddy copies of stuff, and that it's really not something you might want to download it, take a peek of it, see what it's all about, see if you're interested, which if you think about it is like a promotional material. But so I think they've got it covered at that level, and I think frankly, I'm sure all of us have the same types of feelings about DRM, but I really think DRM would become a more legitimate and more relied upon method of protecting what people see today as intellectual property in a libertarian market.
I like the point about
really
contracts.
That's what you've got.
I like the point about contracts. It seems to me you can get some, and maybe even a lot, it's hard to quantify it, of what we think of as IP through a contractual relationship. So if a movie studio is distributing a movie to movie theaters, part of the contract can be you won't let people sit in the seats with a video camera and record the movie by shooting at the screen. I agree the quality is not very good. I can't believe that cuts very much into the profits, but I don't know. Maybe I don't know what I'm talking about in that case. But anyway, that would be a legitimate contract, right? The theater owner or the chain wants the movie, so they're willing to sign the contract to say, "Oh, sure, I'll police my," just like they don't let people in with outside food, right? Or they try not to. We won't let people shoot videos of the movie. So you can get. It seems to me you can get some of this with that. On the other hand, if IP can be shown to be illegitimate, using the arguments I'm using, it seems to me it's not an argument to say, well, how is someone going to make money? I mean, why is that burden of the person who's given made a philosophical case against IP? It's not his burden to come up with an alternative business plan. People will come up with alternative business plans. Open source software is an alternative business plan. The people that wrote Linux, what's his name? Tor, whatever.
Linus.
Yeah,
Linus
Torvald. And there were many other open source things that are very sophisticated programs, right, that are given away. They're making money. How do they make money? Well, they've, number one, established their reputation. They get called for consulting, modifying the program for a person or company's particular needs. They found an alternative business plan that didn't involve IP.
Well, it's a service plan. It's a service plan, and you also see that in the music business. Artists are kind of getting around to the idea that the tape they cut is almost worthless to them, except as promotional material, and they make their money going on concerts now.
Yeah, it's just through tours.
And so it's the same thing again, though. It's not the property; it's the service. If you see the service as being the concert or the support, that kind of thing.
My son has a band. Young unknown bands are finding the internet and giving stuff away on the internet is a way to get known. They don't get a hearing from the big distribution companies. I know some people are talking about the days when those big companies won't even exist because bands will go directly to the public, and they're finding new business models that don't necessarily involve IP. So it's not the end of the line if IP can't pass muster. According to moral principle or legal principle, it's not the end of the line for creative work. People are smart. They're entrepreneurial. They'll think of another way to make money doing their artistic work. That's what entrepreneurs do. That's what entrepreneurs do.
This is Gus speaking again.
Okay, Gus.
I wanted to mention crowdfunding allows you sometimes to get paid for stuff before you do it. So I can see that working.
There are books that, you're right, have gotten funded. That's right.
Well, even films.
Yeah. Yes,
is that
definitely
tough to legally unwind? Crowdfunding? You'd see. It seems to me like it sort of invites not finishing, and then all the trouble that comes with not finishing.
So what?
My understanding for crowdfunding is that those are just raising funds to cover the costs. So it's not necessarily something where they're looking to create profit from it. They're just trying to cover their cost of production.
No, there's no reason why they can't extend it to profit.
Well, yeah,
I think that people would see. I think because there's a nonprofit connotation to the crowdfunding. It could be, but it would have to be pretty upfront with people. Typically, the idea is that they're not going to use it for profit.
I view crowdfunding differently than you do, apparently.
Also, I find it peculiar, this is a kind of a running theme with the state, that it suddenly changes the game if money's involved. Your rights can be attenuated if you make a profit. It suddenly becomes worth digging into it. Of course, we know why the reason it's worth digging into it if there's money on the table. It's because the state wants some of it. But that's, even if it's through extortion, no, you can't do this unless. There's all kinds of mechanisms involving money where suddenly the state gets involved and complicates things.
Well, I wanted to go back to Travis's comment about Hollywood. I think Hollywood is such an interesting focal point for this conversation because Hollywood itself, of course, was derived. The whole reason it existed is because back in New Jersey, Thomas Edison had all the patents that were so broad that nobody could break into the industry at all. And so some people that really wanted to get into the movie-making industry moved all the way out to Hollywood, which was still the Wild West at the time, thinking they could get around all those patent laws in order to actually create movies, and that's what led to Hollywood. Paramount and trying to remember, Universal Studios, both of those were direct results of people trying to escape the patent laws. So there's absolutely clear evidence that especially overly broad patent laws are extremely detrimental. And that was the other thing I was going to bring up is my husband said the same thing in the IT industry. The problem with the intellectual patent laws, and I know you guys have already talked about this, is because they're allowing the broad patents of just these general concepts. He was telling me these outrageous things about, oh, well, this guy was able to patent the idea of using silicon for transferring data. So anything that uses silica, this guy's got a piece of it. Just all of these wide, broad concepts. Anything that uses wiring. Just those things. That's why I think if they are going to have any of these laws, they need to be extremely narrow, very unique ideas. Instead of anyone with the name Joe, I own them. They need to be broad, and they need to be very short term, which I think should actually be dictated by the trends in the market. And unfortunately, for a lot of people, the expiration on good ideas in the market is getting smaller and smaller anyway. You can only stay in business as long as you keep your business model up to date naturally, and that's the natural business cycle. So I would like to see the intellectual property laws scaled way back, but I'm not all the way there with getting rid of them completely, just because of that. I'm very focused on that incentivized process, and I've seen so many issues on the other side of it where it has de-incentivized people to not be able to make a profit. So I'm trying to see if there isn't a balance that could be struck even with the libertarian ideas and the economic side of it. And it seems like that balance, though, is like very close to much closer to the not having any laws at all side, if any. But what do you guys think?
Well, if even just looking at a purely consequentialist way now, leaving aside the moral philosophy of it, to take the point you raised, it seems to me you are expecting way too much from the people who write laws, right? In other words, you have an ideal regime in mind, but number one, I don't have any confidence that those people will get it right. And add to that all the public choice problems, all the lobbying, the special interests. You're never going to get that out of it. So even if we leave the moral philosophy aside and only look at it economically or consequentially, I don't think you're going to achieve what you want. You're going to end up with all the things. You're going to end up with all the things you regard as abuses. And speaking of abuses, like in the pharmaceutical area, you know how a company can extend its patent. It instead of working on new drugs, it slightly tweaks an existing drug as the patent's getting close to expiration. So spending its effort on making it look different, a little different enough to justify getting it repatented. And they could have been spending that time making a new drug. So
with drugs, you have to deal with the seen versus the unseen. Oh, you want to protect this guy that's producing this drug that might save someone's life. Well, how about the dozen people that could create a very similar drug? They're going to be held down with patent problems that will never create that better drug.
Boldrin and Levine in their book they have an entire chapter on pharmaceuticals. This is regarded as like the toughest issue in a lot of people's minds because the R&D is very expensive, leaving aside that the FDA makes the R&D very expensive.
Right.
But leave that aside, I assume it's very expensive anyway. They have a whole chapter on it, and they say there's no correlation between countries that have done well over the years in making pharmaceuticals and marketing pharmaceuticals and the strength of their patent protection. In some cases, you've had countries that have been world players that had zero patents. So if you're interested, I recommend you look at the book. Again, you can get it for free.
Plus, it's probably killing people. I mean, that's another thing you got to take into account. The fact that things aren't on the market is probably killing people.
Yeah.
Drugs.
I understand that has been the case for many, many developments. And who was it that mentioned that somebody was trying to patent pot or certain strains of it? My understanding is you can go back to the old cancer for cure apricot seed pit argument where because it could not be patented because it was considered a work of God, it could not be patented. So even though it was showing this extreme promise in curing cancer and other ailments, pharmaceutical companies just weren't interested in it more because they couldn't patent it.
Mary Ruart,
they didn't promote it at all.
Mary Ruart cited an example of, I think it was vitamin D, the company she was with, or it was calcium and D or something like that, actually bothered to do the clinical studies to demonstrate that it was successful. But the only reason they did that was so they could use it along with one of their drugs, because they could patent that. And they saved a whole lot of lives, but they only did it with you get what I'm saying. The natural part was the work on the natural stuff was only done because they could create a property. And if we didn't have that, everybody'd do that work.
Yeah, I've heard this said about all the herbal stuff that no one's willing to invest. But on the other hand, there's an example of books. Government puts out studies or government documents, say the Pentagon Papers, or anybody can publish those, right? Those are regarded as in the public domain because they were tax funded. Once they're out, the Pentagon Papers, I realized was leaked, but once it was out, the New York Times, the Washington Post brings out paperback books of those documents. And they've done this not just with things that originally were leaked, but just released papers. They do that. Why do they do that? They do that when they know full well that anyone else can do it too, because you can't copyright, a government report. And yet people still bring them out and promote them and advertise them. And yet they know that the publishing company down the street tomorrow can bring out its own copy. So people still obviously find a way and have an incentive to produce things even when they don't have intellectual property protection. And I think there's an overlook there, a point there. Sorry, did somebody say something? I thought I heard someone's voice. Okay. Anyway, I think we overlook the incentives and the entrepreneurship involved that can carry things along even in the absence of patents and copyrights. But anyway, we've hit 7. Anybody want to get a last word in before we close down? All right. Well, listen, I appreciate it. Go ahead.
Yeah, Sheldon, I was just wondering, I came in a couple of minutes late. In the list of resources that you referred to early on, did you mention the website questioncopyright.org?
Oh, no. Thank you for doing that, though. Questioncopyright.org. There are a lot of good resources online. So,
right. And then also further on the discussion of what's going on with music, if you haven't seen the website patronism.org, I think if you look at what's going on there, you'll see that there are people who are making a profit and supporting themselves without using the older business model that requires this mega corporation between an artist and his fans.
Mm-hmm. And what's that site again?
Patronism.org.
Okay, I'll look that up myself. Okay, well, listen, our next webinar will be April 16th. It's always a Wednesday, and it'll be on. It's called "Don't Rock the Vote." It's about why get out the vote campaigns are not good ideas. It's my whole view. It's not original with me. I'm reporting a lot of people's work on what's wrong with voting, why voting is a lousy way to make decisions, mass democratic voting. So again, I appreciate you all joining me. This is fun, and I hope you'll come back. See you all next
Okay,
month.
thank you, Sheldon, and everyone.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.